And we're back. Welcome to Abstractable. I'm Lockie and this is Ryan. And this is a podcast by two guys in blue shirts who are curious about the world around us and want to learn new things. And we hope to do that with you as we go through these episodes. In this episode, we talk about Range by David Epstein, which is a really cool book.
And other than the fact I was wearing the blue shirt first, what do we cover? It's a book about specialists and generalists. And why we should treat career paths more like dating. We talk about some great people with some great range, the more effective ways of learning, and we also discuss some methods for problem solving and what domain thinking is and how we can utilize it. David Epstein, that's Epstin. You can find him on Twitter at David Epstein or davidepstein.com for his blog.
Cool.
We hope you enjoy the episode as much as we did enjoy the book. Thanks.
And we're back. So, Range.
David Epstein.
You put me onto this book, actually.
Yeah, this was going back a couple of months ago now.
Yeah. While you were traveling through Europe. And I started listening to it when I was on a long car trip, and it was awesome. It really connected a few dots for me, which is pretty cool.
Captured your attention pretty quick.
Damn right.
Yeah. There was a there was a quote at the start of the book, which I'll pull up later. We'll get to it, and it kind of summarised the entire book for me, and kind of grabbed the hook in my mouth and pulled me out of the water as I was kind of vagabonding around Europe at the time.
Right. How did you hear about it?
I've got no idea.
Right.
Yeah, I think
Goodreads or something.
It would have been one of the many Twitter posters or one of the many podcasts or one of the many, who knows?
Yeah, cool.
I can't recall.
Yeah, I'm actually worried for me that I'm suffering a lot of confirmation bias on some of the stuff he talks about, and I need to be careful to make sure I find another opinion. But I guess other opinions are what we've been hearing most of our lives. I mean, just for context, this book is about generalization versus specialization. It's an overwhelming topic. I said that it was the ode to the generalist, this book.
It is. It's kind of that. It does the confirmation bias thing for me too.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that, Lockie?
I mean that you kind of search for things that confirm your opinion, and you're more likely to believe those, because this lines up a lot with the way I think, and probably the way you think, and the way that we talk about things, and the idea of the podcast in general, I think, which we'll get into a bit later about how it kind of matches up. But
the quote I was mentioning was, increasing specialization has created a system of parallel trenches. In the quest for innovation, everyone is digging deeper into their own trench and rarely standing up to look at the next trench over, even though the solution to their problem happens to reside in there.
That's interesting.
And that kind of just pulled me in from the start.
Yeah.
And from a problem-solving perspective, but also from a career perspective.
Yeah, I think it's got a lot to do with kind of the way that teams work together, the way we silo things out. But it's also, for me, it resonated more on a personal level about the way that I approach learning new things, and the idea of how, getting good at something actually works.
I actually, as we were preparing for this episode, I, funnily enough, was watching or came across a documentary that I've been meaning to watch for quite some time, which is The Pleasure of Finding Things Out by Richard Feynman. It was a documentary on Richard Feynman, who you're aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he's a famous physicist, essentially, very renowned, won the Nobel Prize.
He's got a real cult following amongst the podcasters that we listen to.
He does. And it's been a while for me to kind of chip into him. I've started reading, he's got a semi-autobiography where he describes his upbringing. Surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman. And
probably more of a memoir.
It is, yeah. It's very much a memoir, and just a couple of scatterings of how he's come to be the way he is, I think. He talks in very analogical terms and, sense. He wants to build a narrative. He wants to build a narrative around, creating analogies to what he's talking about. But
he's a pretty playful guy.
He's a playful guy, and he's an absolute generalist. Even though he's this specialist physics professor who did some incredible things in his time, he was also just curious about the world and tried many different things and was involved in many different projects. So it was very, very nicely fitting watching that when I did.
So David Epstein's the author, and not that much information is around about David. This is his second book though, but he was born in 1983, and so he's not a super old guy.
Pretty young.
He's quite successful for his age, and he's a graduate of Columbia University, where he studied environmental science and astronomy, which, is a good...
generalist combo.
Well, it goes to show, he's kind of living what he espouses in this book about, having different interests. But he did do a master's in environmental science and journalism, and he ended up going into journalism.
But into what?
Well, yeah, I mean, he's jumped around in the journalist space too, but he's really a writer. He's an avid runner too, and he actually holds some records at Columbia University for the 800 metres. So there you go, which is probably leads into what he ends up looking into first. But without getting too far ahead of myself, he went into a job in jobs in journalism post-graduation, and was a science and investigative reporter at ProPublica, which is seems to be, I hadn't really heard of it before, but looking at their website, they seem to specialise in sort of investigative journalism, trying to really find injustices and expose them in the world. So pretty interesting. He also worked at Sports Illustrated, and he co-authored the story that revealed that Yankees third baseman Alex Rodriguez had used steroids, which was a huge deal a while ago in the US, and sort of we found out about it here in Melbourne. But yeah, which is pretty good effort, I suppose. One of his, he's written heaps of stuff and gotten heaps of awards, but his first book is probably where he really kind of jumped in to kind of maybe people like us could kind of hear about him a bit more. And he released a TED talk about that got, say, 7 million views and was recommended by Bill Gates, So this is where he's starting to look into sort of some interesting nonfiction work. And his first book was about professional athletes and what makes them good,
What makes them tick.
Yeah, and also how do they get so good, and is it genetics, is it upbringing, is it nature versus nurture, and this sort of stuff. It actually sounds like a really interesting book.
Look, the way I understand it is that kind of helped form part of the thinking that went into range,
Yeah, well, he does cover that early in the book he does a comparison between Roger Federer's upbringing and Tiger Woods, and Tiger Woods has got your kind of typical narrative of has a golf club in his hand, Andre Agassi style, at the age of 2, and a father that's pushing him to continually practicing his strokes until he becomes the best in the world.
Yeah, the father living through the son in that situation.
Yeah.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah, seems that way. And but he kind of goes on to talk about this kind of generalist approach is actually very effective, and the way that most sports people come up is through a more broad early start in their career and then a specialisation later on.
Yeah, I think that was one of the real clicking points for me, was because he early on he discusses the kind of career approaches before he gets into some of the real nuanced stuff around domain thinking, which we'll talk a little bit about later. And there was just some really, really good points raised around, Why don't we treat careers like we treat dating? Yeah. It's kind of like we just go in with the first thing that we've been kind of landed on, at a ripe old age of, 16, 17 or 18 years old, in deciding a particular line of work or study that we want to go into. And then the expectation is that the pursuit of that forever. Yeah. And it's not to say that some people don't find an answer to maybe that question early on, but...
Well, some people, I think there's two categories. There's the people that, well, let's call it three categories. The people that go into something and truly love it and nail it and find a way to really enjoy it and grow from it. So they're happy. The second type is the people that don't like it and end up changing a lot, and they kind of search for what they want. And then the third type is the people that stay in it but don't look too hard at themselves and are just unhappy but maybe aren't looking at that either, But there's a fair bit in that around also, I think, what pressures there are from society and the hangovers from the industrial age, I think, and the idea of seeing people as widgets.
Yeah,
and training them as so.
The process, the manufacturing line mentality almost.
And it doesn't really hold up now. So he finished that book, New York Times bestseller, went really well. And then this year he released Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialised World. And it became a New York Times #1 bestseller. So couple of home runs, to use a bit of a sports analogy there.
You would love that, mate.
Oh, some of my best work. So, but a bit of a brief outline on David, but the real meat of the book is got nothing to do with him. It's really about what he's investigated.
Well, I like you say that, but I also like that he's kind of living what he's preaching. To a degree,
skin in the game.
Yeah, skin in the game. And he's, the shifts that he's made from science into sports journalism into more, upbringing and almost new, getting into some of the neuroscience behind it is pretty incredible.
It's a well-researched book, and I love reading these type of books that it's just not too heavy. It's explained through a lot of examples. And it's got a really interesting subject matter that kind of dances around on different levels. Really satisfying. I think a lot of Malcolm Gladwell's books are kind of like that. That they use really interesting examples and stuff like that, and keep you quite riveted on a point that's probably other people wouldn't present so well.
Yeah, there's a lot of excitement down in everything.
Yeah.
If you can tease it out and find out where the curiousness needs to be. Coming back around to, I guess what I was doing in Europe is part of a bit of a career shift myself, and reading the book over there just kind of coincided, as serendipity has, a bit serendipitous, a bit coincidental as things happen. And again, I'm hoping it's not just confirming my own biases, but it provides you a little bit more confidence in what you're doing, and particularly for people that are, they might be considering a shift themselves because, they haven't got much energy into what they're doing at the moment, or it's not quite sparking them, and they're not feeling excited to get up in the morning. I found this is kind of that kick in the butt to get you moving, to get you out the door and try something else.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you really related to this in terms of your current journey to finding where you want to be.
Yeah, and just making that shift, and just, the trying element was really important. And it's spoken about in the book on a number of occasions, but we have this real deep sunk cost mindset about things. And look, that's a survival characteristic that we have. We don't want to waste energy somewhere and then have to, lose all that we've invested energy-wise into something and go and put it into something else starting from scratch, Again, much like a lot of our natural fight or flight lizard brain characteristics, it's all well and good back in the days, but not so relevant to modern society maybe.
So what would you say are the general steps that David takes you through in this book and the general premise of it?
He covers quite a lot, but in terms of the career stuff, they pull out, so the sunk cost is that we so much so that, like, conmen, for example, will commonly use a sunk cost to kind of initially entice the mark or the target that they want to pick on. And then by getting them to commit to a few small favors, we'll actually end up having that person invest in something much larger or spend a little bit more time on something or sign up or whatever it is, which they never would have done straight off the bat. It's about getting that initial investment. And so a lot of people fear the loss or the emotional hurt or the kind of trauma with disagreeing with someone at the time or saying no because of what we've previously invested. It's quite profound. But he also covers off a great deal about how important it is that we move outside of our almost myopic view of what we specialise in, particularly initially, to look at problem solving.
Yeah, I think that he kind of challenges the view that is out there and sort of, I suppose, pushed upon people about the path of learning and the path of your career, where you go to school, you learn things, you get a little bit more specialised as you go through high school. Then you pick what you want to do. Then you go to university and you specialise further in that, say, engineering, which is what I did. And then you just learn heaps about engineering, and then you learn about civil engineering, and then you learn about bridge design or whatever you want to go into. And you keep honing and honing and honing further and further and further into it, like a golf swing. And you get better and better at your chipping and your putting, and you just keep specialising further and further, and you'll get better and better and better at that particular skill, leading to great success. That's sort of
it's a continually narrowing path.
Yeah. Whereas what he's talking about more broadly in this book is the importance not to do that, and the benefits that come from that, and that kind of idea and that whole, I suppose, philosophy is something that doesn't actually happen that often in real life. Things don't play out that way very often. Only in very specific scenarios does that actually work, usually in relation to games that repeat themselves over and over again, like chess.
Simple world problems.
What Nassim would call the ludic fallacy. Trying to imagine that real life is like a game of chess, and it's just not. So he weaves that idea through and gives countless of examples about why that's not the case. But then he takes it broader and talks about how to solving problems and opening the gates up between specializations actually reduces this domain thinking, and actually you can solve a lot of problems just by borrowing from other fields. That was something that I've been thinking about heaps since reading Nassim Taleb's books, and I find to be just definitely true.
What is domain thinking, Lockie?
So domain thinking is where I have been trying to figure out how to explain this clearly, and I'm going to give it my best shot right now. So domain thinking is where humans tend to attach ideas, thoughts and things to a physical domain or a physical area, I believe. So whether it's, say, you wear a soccer outfit at soccer, you don't feel comfortable doing that in a business meeting because that's not the attire of a business meeting, for example. You feel comfortable doing that at a soccer pitch because that's what soccer is. That's the agreed construct that we've made about soccer. Well, the same goes for the type of skills that we apply on the soccer pitch and the teamwork that we use and the way we approach getting better. We won't transfer that to a business context because it's in a different domain. Our brains just have trouble with that sort of what he calls in this book abstraction. And that this is a skill that can be learnt, it's within us, but it's not natural to us. And he gives the example, which we'll probably talk about a little bit further on, about these villages that it was a professor from somewhere, anyway, we'll find it. Sorry, I'm a bit loose on the facts, from where this guy's from. But he goes to some villages that are remote and tries to do experiments on them surrounding trying to find out why the modern people score better on IQ tests than people from, say, previous generations. And it's got to do with the fact that the modern world teaches you to build this abstraction skill, to be able to connect different concepts, but not just by what's obviously directly in front of you and related to what you're doing. And so that is a simple version of this domain dependence where as you get better at that, so I can tell that that's a cup, this is a cup and that's a cup, even though they all look different. Or you could connect these 4 cups in concept in probably 10 different ways, but someone from, say, pre-World War I would have more trouble with that. But you can take that concept further and start to connect different concepts and theories and stuff from thermodynamics into how a business works. You can connect the way that cactus grows to, how you learn things and grow yourself. And that's how you break down the domains. So often you don't actually, it's super powerful because you don't actually need to think of new ideas. You just need to have the wherewithal to connect abstract concepts and also go looking for them in other areas. The answers to a lot of your problems that you're struggling with now, say in your work or what have you, someone in IT's probably solved those. You just got to go look and steal it.
Someone on the soccer team probably solved them.
Yeah,
they have related problems in the soccer game.
Yeah,
whether that's around team management that applies to team management in a business context, but because it's in a different domain, we often don't look at it because we think it's irrelevant.
No, and this is where building a big mental network is really important. And this is something I've been trying to think about a lot too, is that if you build a giant network of ideas in your mind and connect these different areas, you can start to solve problems that you couldn't before just by this kind of comparison that you can do.
Great. Well, we know one major notable example out of the book that he touches on, which is Charles Darwin. And Charles Darwin was renowned for how many pen pals he had. I can't recall the number, but there was 13 different categories of pen pals that were kind of pulled out by the psychologist who ended up going through all his journals, and I think he actually wrote a biography on him.
He'd love Twitter.
Oh, he'd absolutely love it. And hashtag molecular biology.
There's some nerdy jokes.
And
hashtag HMAS Beagle.
and he ended up drawing upon all of these different pen pals he had to try and come up with different formulations for why the world was the way it was. There's one particular example where he was trying to work through something in the space of as part of his evolutionary theory, right, on natural selection. But he was actually talking to geologists, and he was talking to other biologists, and he was talking to people in completely different domains to try and get their perspectives and understandings for why these things work.
Triangulate the thinking.
Correct.
Get just totally unique perspectives.
Yeah. And it clearly...
and because the other thing to note is that because this is a human inherent bias almost that we've got. Everyone does it. So there's a massive opportunity if you can realize that and build the muscle that breaks through that, because you're just going to be able to do something that no one else is really doing, and that has huge benefits.
Yeah. And I think the really important thing is the fallibility of our memories, and recognizing the fallibility of our memories, which Darwin also did at the time. So he wouldn't just be writing these letters and building these networks and communicating with these people. He would receive letters back. He would cut things out from their letters. He would, paste them onto his notes. And he ended up with this kind of bewildered compilation of different things spread across heaps of different sheets of paper. But there's something very powerful in that. He's both going through the act of exerting energy and writing these things down for himself. He's then pulling in other people's concepts, other people's ideas. He's putting the physical, the physical touch of other things, seeds and, plant material and things onto his pages and putting them there for reference so that he can come back to them and draw on them later on down the track. I thought that was quite an interesting thought.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
It relates. It's even. I saw it as a similar concept to. Remember the Monday notes. So these are the notes that were developed in the Marshall Space Flight Center. If you recall, and yeah. So this was Werner von Braun that developed this system, which every week engineers submitted a single page. We love this because it's engineers. Submitted a single page of notes on their salient issues. And von Braun would actually receive all of these Monday notes and write comments, go through them. It was a very rigorous process, but it wasn't formal. It wasn't forced. People weren't held to write things in particular ways or whatever. It was more of a form of just general communication and getting it out. And they ended up having some major breakthroughs as a result. But then shortly after, his successor came in, William Lucas, and basically took that idea and used it as a accountability tool. He used it as a tool to intervene and shoot people down. He was actually described as a shoot the messenger type guy by Alan MacDonald, and basically transferred it into an upwards communication process rather than collating all these ideas from different domains within the big organisation.
So he destroyed a network and made a traditional hierarchy, basically.
Yeah. He talks about the hierarchy and the communication line. And the hierarchy was one thing and the communication was another. And they kind of have this ongoing pressure within one another.
He destroyed the connection between the nodes.
Correct.
So I guess the point, going back to careers, is that we're dealing with a complex system, the world, right? And this whole book plays into Nassim Taleb's Black Swan world and the non-linear. And it kind of tells you, among other things, how to deal with it, And so it's very interesting to know that. So there's things that are like, say, a more of a non-complex system, such as chess, or that he goes through a few examples of chess masters, how basically constant repetition of something teaches you how to do that same thing very, very well. But as soon as a small thing changes, it's not that useful anymore. And even the best chess masters can't really deal with if the game's changed slightly, like a rule's changed or something like that. Because that's essentially a widget type function,
Pull a
you're
wedge
just
out
teaching
of
yourself to do this. If I see that, then I'll do that. If I see this, then I'll move this. But games that are even slightly more complex than chess, that doesn't work very well. And most of the best people that have ever come with a lot of other sports, which are, again, sports are highly controlled environments compared to the real world, it doesn't even work that well for becoming an expert in those. Well, not as well. Maybe we should say that. You can get very good doing that, but you can't most of the people who are truly world class haven't come that way. They've dabbled in other things and then late intense practice in their specialized field. And so how that relates to careers is that it's good to sample different things and try different things. And like you said, do the work through like dating, because when you do find your chosen thing that you really do like and you do hone into it, you'll be so much more equipped to deal with that than you would at the start. And you'll actually accelerate quite quickly afterwards.
Yeah.
And you'll be more adaptable, because the real world, it's unpredictable. So you've got to get good at dealing with new ideas, new changes, and working through them.
Yeah, there's a real ongoing, change is the only constant, and being able to draw on different rules from different places that you've kind of learnt and brought into your subconscious is part of the advantage, I guess, in that, as well as the seeking out of the what you enjoy type scenario.
Yep.
The example that he really describes in the book is Van Gogh. And
did you go to that museum in Amsterdam in the end?
I didn't go to Van Gogh. No,
I did. I loved it.
We went. I think we overdid. Museum.
You got fatigue.
we got fatigued. Yeah,
fair enough.
Which I think is definitely something that can happen.
I don't really do museums anymore.
Yeah,
I don't find them very exciting, which that's pretty normal.
Yeah, I think you go to one every now and then. It kind of
that'll do.
Yeah, satisfies your curiosity for a while.
You're like, oh, I remember what this is like. It's pretty boring.
But he was known for how much he moved around, and he really didn't land on being an artist until his mid-30s, and I think he died when he was in his late 30s, or shortly after. He was only an artist for a few years or several years. He had involvement in the art game early on, but he also had involvement in completely different fields. And he ended up writing a letter to his brother at one point in time. He said he feels like he's a bird that's banging his head against the bars of a cage, and then the cage stays there, and the bird is mad with suffering. He describes it. A man too, he exhorted, doesn't always know himself what he could do, but he feels by instinct, I'm good for something, even so. I know that I could be quite a different man. There's something within me. So what is it? He's pretty intense sort of guy. But he basically spent his 20s and early 30s kind of just jumping from thing to another. Not saying that that's the way to go, but I think that's probably an extreme example of how far you can take those things and where that can potentially lead. Because when he did finally land on, the type of painting that he wanted to do, he was drawing in all these other things that he learnt from other other times in his various careers, and brought them into this completely new style of painting for the time, and shifted the entire paradigm of painting.
It's so good, isn't it? It's hard to kind of draw too much from one example, but this is not isolated, There's thousands of these examples, and
even in the book they're not isolated. There's so many different examples.
And yes, art is super subjective, and who knows, but there's no doubt that he's a very skillful artist.
Well, I think the important thing with, say, the likes of Van Gogh is at the time is when photography was developing, or certainly developing in a bigger way as technology. And so art was at a point where it really needed to shift in terms of what it offered to people and what it was, because realism was, all but being replaced by technology to a degree.
Yeah.
And so this is where the innovation comes from, and creating a new solution to a problem, or a new way of looking at things. And I think that's probably what he was able to leverage, although I'm sure there's many more educated art critiques that will point out exactly what I'm talking about here.
It reminds me of sort of what a point in the Naval podcast was, where when everyone gets something and it made me draw an extra conclusion about when technological change happens, people move more towards the artistic. And what Naval was saying was like, if food becomes widely available, then the rich people want more artistic food as a status thing. It's not that the food's better, you know. And maybe there's a touch of that in what you just said, where it's, hey, everyone's got a camera that can take a photo now. This painting's no longer needed. Well, what if we go a bit more abstract on it?
Well, what is abstract? You know, even back then, it was very developmental type thought back then. It's very interesting. But you're totally right.
It's exciting to know, and the more you kind of read about different people, the more you've got plenty of time if you're lucky enough to be healthy, you know, which is, you know, not a given for everyone or for no one, I mean, but you've got a long time to figure things out. Like someone like Van Gogh in his, what did you say, mid to late 30s or what have you, before he died young, produced some of the best work. You know, others start companies in their 40s. You know, I think one of the stats from Range was that if a tech founder's over 40, they're way more likely to do a successful company. But the image is the Mark Zuckerbergs out there rolling the code out, you know. But so
the exciting news story is the
young genius, you know, the lone genius. So
it's kind of like the get rich quick schemes, you know. They got the same narrative to them.
Yeah, to me it's exciting. Like, hey, there's heaps of time. Just keep building that mental network up. Keep learning new things, and it compounds on itself. But the message that I keep going back to is, when I read different books about complexity and the new complex connected world we're living in, is that networks beat the complex. They're a way to combat the complex. If it's rock, paper, scissors and someone's throwing out a complex system, you're throwing a network. It's how you deal with at personal level, at a risk management level, at a organizational level. If you can build networks, you'll thrive in the world that's evolving in front of us. And people, I think, are slowly figuring that out. And I'm one of them. I'm trying to learn this.
Yeah, it was always there's always that old saying. It's like, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I think that's applicable not just from a sense of getting a shortcut to getting a job or something like that. It's about knowing people that have an area of expertise that's so far beyond what you know. And there's a little bit more to that saying than just and it's not even restricted to like the traditional network, like we think of it, like your professional network of people. It's like a network of ideas, a network of I suppose knowledge network's a good one. So
inefficiency, is not necessarily a bad thing if everything's connected. Sending out information to a whole bunch of people through a Slack channel that everyone has access to. Well, you've created a network there and you're giving yourself more chance of someone knowing the thing that you don't expect. If you're talking about physics and you're talking about a washing machine, you want to hone that washing machine to be the most efficient thing you can, because you know that every time it turns, it's going to obey the same laws of physics that it did last time. But that's not the case with most other things. So don't be aware of trying to create the Henry Ford assembly line, right?
Well, it's like with the washing machine, yes, the washing machine operates in a particular way every time because that's kind of the way it's done. But what about making the new washing machine? Is there another way we need to think about a new type of washing machine? Think about when we used to have those, what were they called?
The top loader.
Yeah, the top loader, or even before the top loader was the dual.
Smashing the clothes on the rocks at the
scrubbing them.
The scrub washboard.
Yeah. And just thinking about the next evolution of that machine, right?
Yes.
And not being stuck to the thinking of the past and thinking outside.
I like what you said about knowledge networks too. I think that's what I was trying to stumble over.
Yeah. So the big on say the the Monday notes and Darwin's pen pals and kind of scrapping together these scrapbooks of notes that he was doing. The thing that I really took away from that was there's an act of writing things down, and there's also an act of building almost your own encyclopedia that you understand, that you know your way around. And so for me, I use Evernote to do that. And just now that kind of really emphasized to me the importance of continuing to take the notes. I love Evernote because of the tagging system.
Well, you've got me onto Evernote now. So I'm going to try and learn it so I can get better at note taking, because mine are all over the place.
And I go back to notes, when I first started using it. I'm like, where's all my tags on this? I'm missing all these different tags. Well, the system kind of develops and you build this continual network of different things. You then can, that's kind of a digital version. And I think there's something lost going from the physical to the digital, but with the digital, you've got efficient searching. I think it's faster to capture things and whatever, but you miss the kind of tactile, being able to see all the pages spread out, nature, which hopefully isn't too big of a drawback, because then you compare it to the likes of Robert Greene's or Ryan Holiday's system for writing books, like what they do to gather their...
I don't know that. What's that?
So as they're going through books, they will conduct a process of writing notes and things. So this is very much that conversation with the author. So whenever you're reading a book, Farnham Street blog writes a lot about this, and Ryan Holiday writes about this. Lots of different people write about these different things, and you can search all that pretty easily. There's actually a really good book written called How to Read a Book.
That's cool.
The author's name escapes me right now, but he covers off on this type of stuff. So they're having a conversation with the author as they're actively reading. Now, this is typically in the space of nonfiction, but still applies in fiction, because there's some great constructions of society or critiques of the way things are in fictional works too. And having this kind of engaged conversation with the author through notes then finds its way onto their cram card system that they use. So they basically go through then the notes a week or two later after they've read the book.
See, that gap's good.
The gap is so important. There's something about the space and the time, because when you're coming back to these notes, you're in a slightly different mindset. You're in a different place to when you originally read it. And some of the stuff will be garbage. You just toss it out or ignore it completely. But some of the stuff will definitely stick. And that's the stuff that they capture or that they want to write. And they, you can read more about his process. There's a lot more nuance to it, particularly how they group things together and whatever. But this is how they go to build up the information for writing, some of their masterpieces like 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. Employed this very system to how he got to write that book.
That's cool.
So now there's emphasis on a digital version of that to create your own cross-domain network of knowledge.
Damn right.
And you know your way around your network better than anyone else.
And I think that's part of what we're trying to do with this podcast is just, it needs no design. You just got to be curious and try and find out things that are interesting to you. But the key that once you do read something, I believe, is that you connect it. It's no use if it's a node in the middle of floating in midair. You've got to try and just start to feel out what is this like? What does this concept remind me of? Where else have I seen this? And you can start to make connections in your mind. And that started happening to me more recently when I've upped my reading game a bit, is that I'll start to feel this thing, hey, that's a bit like that, that reminds me of X, reminds me of Y.
Another one of those,
yeah. Yeah. So, and in that way,
that was a Ray Dalio.
You can better understand the thing you're reading about, because we love to compare things. We learn through comparison, like how we can see one colour better on top of another unless you're colourblind. And so you can start building this network up and you better understand both sides of the node that you've put the connection from one to another. So Yeah, I've recently written a blog post that's going to come out soon. Watch for that. A little bit of promotion there, Ryan, about how I started to fully understand how to build a proper team culture by thinking about fractal geometry, which is in one of Nassim Taleb's books about repeating a simple process over and over creates self-similar looking things. And I realized it when I was buying soap in Aesop. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that was
a bit of Aesop.
Oh,
they are
amazing.
Everywhere.
They are. It's a genius thing.
Their new office is going up in Collingwood at the moment.
Really?
Yeah, nice and close to my.
I'm sure it would be
my old house.
Very cool.
And it's got that brown, that brown tint that they have on all their products through it. It's on the building, so they've obviously had a bit of an influence over what the building's going to look like.
That's cool.
But it's nice seeing how well a local Melbourne company is doing.
They've done very well.
Humble beginnings. Mind you, they have been around for a long time. And not many people know that. Like, it's 20 plus years.
Yeah. But they took their time and they got there. So, but I think that I was pretty excited by that because that really helped me. And I was like, oh, wow. Well, this is a weird concept I've come up with that's helped me understand things. So I want to keep doing more of that.
Yeah. And there's something important in writing, in capturing these things down, as you said.
It solidifies it. So if something comes to you and you kind of feel it in your bones, stop and write it down, or write it in your phone or something, and then it'll be there.
And these like the separate domain, problem solving process, if you will, fractal geometry, for example. That process you've employed to, help develop and bolster the team, but it might not be exact. And so then it's important.
Certainly not.
Yeah. And so it's important for you to, because it has worked so well for you, is kind of capture what it actually is and, the nuanced differences between the different processes.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like the limitations of the comparison or analogy, because that's very true with sports. You can take a lot of cool things from sport and transfer them into your workplace, but it's got limits too, like this idea of it's a controlled system, so you can't look too much into it. Some things, like people have got into a lot of trouble comparing, say, probability in casinos to probability in real life. And yes, we are talking a lot about Taleb because this is super related to what he writes, and we love his work. But so it can kind of show you the similarities, but it can also show you what's different, which is important as well.
So what's the in all of this too? There's a really important part, because we actually need to learn, what is going on, and there's a big portion of the book just dedicated to learning, and not so much to, here is the best way to learn, but they discuss the different types of learning, and basically there's good approaches for the short term and there's good approaches for the long term. And then it ends up becoming a bit of a critique on the current education system, which is all designed around benefits in the short term, which is, tests, exams. They're all testing your short-term knowledge. Even so, teacher performance is based around how their students perform that very year.
Well, this comes back to the idea of the simple and the complex, I think. You're trying to teach a complex neuron network how to do something. If you treat it more like a machine, you end up with these kind of outcomes where people are just rote memorizing something and don't understand the actual concept behind it, which I do that all the time to myself, all the time, and I barely realize it. And then someone asks me to explain something, like even now on this podcast, I'm having trouble explaining a lot of these concepts because no one's really, and that's what's so valuable about this conversation, but it's part of our learning. But do you actually get it, or are you just reciting what you read, facts versus theories? And theories always, you need facts to understand theories, like a sentence, you need words. to be able to have a sentence, but the sentence wins because it becomes predictive.
Yeah, there's always that point, to steal another one of Naval's analogies. There's always that point in maths in like year 8 or year 9 or something in school where you don't quite grasp why something is the case and you get a little bit behind, you know, and whether it's the introduction of...
For me, it was fractions.
Fractions.
That cooked me. I was done after that, basically.
See, I could still easily get fractions because I could think of like a pie. You know, there was something I could really relate it to.
Yeah.
But moving into like some of the early algebra, it was all about the rules. It was all about, how do I actually solve this versus what is actually going on here? You know,
I reckon it would have helped me a lot if they'd paired a lot more real life with the maths.
100%.
But like thinking back to some of my maths uni subjects, I just remembered the practice exam. I had no idea what was going on. Absolutely none.
And your graphics calculator.
Oh yeah, that was helpful. That was pure memory, and I retain none of that now. I don't know anything about it. Thank God I'm not a designer, although computers help. But yeah, it's just scary.
Because what's happening then is people after that, you know, so after that, for you, fractions, right? You didn't necessarily know where that fraction was coming from or how it related to something else. You know, all I know is that I need to multiply this across and then end up with, you know, the same thing on the bottom, and then I can kind of work out what's going on.
So it's tough to cross domains if you don't get that, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
Well, but you also, what you're not doing is you're not tying it back to fundamental first principles, which is the way that you're kind of building up this knowledge from the ground up, you know, back in early arithmetic and logic, and you should be able to connect everything back to that and why that is the case. But there's a point at which we become lost and things become difficult.
There's a point also where it doesn't pay necessarily to go too deep into some things just for pragmatism, I guess.
Yeah.
If you get if it doesn't relate too much to the real world, you can get a little lost sometimes.
I think that's a real gripe I had too, was again, if there was more relevant case studies, not obscure situations that were often drawn out in the textbooks, but something that the kids can relate to. I think that's important.
Somebody think of the children, please. God damn it.
For the sake of integration.
So you're yep. Just got that. Yeah, so your question around the learning is sort of a first order, second order consequence, isn't it? You pass the test, but you're worse off in the long run. Yeah.
Well, so there's a couple of really good examples they drew out in the book, and one was there was a study done across a number of different university lecturers and their students' performance, right? And they would compare, deep knowledge professors and different things who had studied these things for a long, long time with those that are a little bit more fresh or a little bit more amateur, still knew what they were talking about in the space of the subject, say early calculus or something of that nature. And what they found is those that didn't know it as well were able, the students in those classes did so much better in that particular year.
Wow.
But this is where it gets interesting, is the professors who would often be explaining things down to trying to tie it back to more fundamental levels.
First principles.
Try and tie it back to first principles and why it was the case. Whilst the students didn't perform as well in that particular year, their results moving forward, and this was like trended across so many different students and so many different lecturers versus the experts versus the not so much. The performance over the coming years was exponentially better, which is incredible. And so it talks about this idea of long-term learning versus short-term learning. and truly understanding the difference between the process memorization versus what this process is.
I remember them talking about the word struggle a lot in that section around. You got to struggle for the knowledge.
Yes.
You got to feel the cogs of your brain turning around.
Which is so coming back to maths again, what did we always do this is what I did in maths, what we did in maths class, is there'd be like a block of problems all centered around the exact same type of thing. And then you go to the next block of problems that were centered around a different thing. And you might have like 10 different problems in each one. And by the time you got to like the 8th or maybe even the 5th problem, right, you kind of worked out the process. You're like, I know how these types of things work. So I'm just going to keep doing that for the next 5 and, you smash your way through it. And then you kind of start again on the next set of problems and you're back a bit.
Yeah. The idea of struggling has got some interesting parallels to physical exercise.
Yeah. In everything. Everything. I feel like that struggle is an important part of really being able to make progress in different ways. So if you learn in that particular, which is this, what that is, all that is doing is teaching you the process in going through the same type of problems and then moving on to the next. And they found that what students who went through this particular process, to learn, versus those that would do one problem from one block, then the next block, then the next block, then the next block, they really struggled big time. And it took them so long to get through them, or they got the answers wrong, but there was a mental effort to try and recall. Quite often now we'll cheat and we'll look up the answer on Google. Just because we'll hit a point of struggle and go, I can't remember what that was, or I don't know why that is. So I'm not going to bother. I'm going to go to Google or look up what the answer is. Whereas those students that went through the struggle performed, again, exponentially better than those who went through it. And they call that interleaving versus those that went through a more of a similar type problem situation.
Is there a point where you don't need to learn some of this stuff because you can just Google it? Are we moving into a world where you're plugged into the computer? But I guess that's where the concepts become even more important, because that will be the last thing that robots are able to do, is that level of abstraction and deal with complex inputs.
They actually touch on this in the book, and I've got a mini prediction coming out of this. Dangerous territory.
Go for it.
So it talks about a guy called Don Swanson, and he was becoming concerned about increasing specialization that was happening in the world, that was obvious in the world, and that it would lead to, and this is in the academic world and, let alone other spaces, it lead to publications that catered only to a very small group of specialists and inhibit creativity. The disparity between the total quantity of recorded knowledge and limited human capacity to assimilate it not only was enormous, but grows unremittingly, I should say. So he was wondering, how can frontiers be pushed if one day it will take a lifetime just to reach that level of specialization in a domain. And so the way I saw this, which certainly isn't new, but is that we're already dealing with this, and we're already dealing with this. Like, who doesn't use a computer at work now? For what they do, and the computers provide this significant form of leverage for how much we're able to achieve. And so into the future, there will be continuing artificial intelligence and different technology that kind of acts as the tools and what some of the people are that we currently manage in an organization. So some of the people that we manage in an organization are going to continue to be replaced by technology, but it doesn't mean that we can't still be managing the same number of people. It's just that you'll be having your own technology that you're leveraging, and every single one of those people will have their technology that they're leveraging, which is doing work that used to be done by people in the same positions. We're already in that place, but that's going to just continue to increase. which means that the computers become the specialists and the people, the workers, become the puppeteers.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Don't know what happens after the singularity, mate, but that's the point of that.
Who knows?
Domain tech.
The other, that's some pretty deep thinking. The other thing,
and just to touch on, because we've touched on him about 6 times this episode already. So what's another one here? Taleb is what happens when a black swan occurs in those situations. In those situations, when the tiny little flaws in each of those various technologies kind of align themselves, which doesn't happen very often, but might happen, but it just takes a lot more time to happen. As a result, the impacts would be, I don't know what the impacts would be, but it would have to be significant.
Yeah.
Because because you're in a leveraged world. You're not in a world of dealing with what the human mind can.
Well, that's an interesting point to my networks comment, is that you need to build networks. However, they need to have some form of siloing. They can't be worldwide networks. It's probably better to have lots of little networks sometimes, because it can mean that a black swan can't just take it all out, It's not a single point of failure or whatever. By the way, we've done an earlier episode on the black swan. If a lot of this is going over your head around what we're talking about with Nassim Taleb, so check that out.
I think it was going over our head in that episode too.
Yeah, or just read his book. So I think to go up a level, to me, one of the themes that ran strongly throughout the book was that if you accept that you can't predict things very well in the world of today, in most things a lot of the time, then the idea of designing your career, designing your learning, designing this becomes pretty useless, because you can't design something for what you don't know the future is. So instead of doing that and designing your learning or what have you, you should be trying to expose yourself to as broad a range of things as possible, so that you're more ready for almost anything. And that, by definition, if you can't predict the future, you also can't predict what's going to be useful. So the thing that you least expect might have the biggest impact in the end of the theory you discover, the thing that helps you better manage your time at work and that sort of thing. And I think that's one of my takeaways from the book, and we can get into what I'm going to do differently after reading this, but I think that was a overarching theme for me, is that if you can't really figure out the future, you should still plan, but don't put as much certainty in the fact that you're going to be able to figure out what skills you want to learn for the future. You got to keep your options open a little bit.
Yeah, there was a quote in the book which needs to be slightly tempered, but it was act first and then think. And it's not.
I translated that in my notes here for tinker.
Yes, but be nimble.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is one thing that you're going to do differently after reading this?
I think there's a number of things. There's always an emphasis on reinforcing some things that you're already doing, but then there's the discovery, like the learning thing was huge for me. I really trying to not force myself into an ease. There's that cognitive ease that comes with, and the dopamine release that comes with getting a lot of answers right quickly, as you're learning something new. But really trying to struggle my way through some things, not to the point that I want to become that I want to resent them.
Hit some resistance.
Yeah, hit the resistance. Really push that cognitive energy. I want to finish a learning session and be totally cooked.
One of our themes that we talked about earlier this year was it's the 3rd of January, so what, 2 days ago, 1 day ago or something? Maybe it was last year.
You're still shifting into the new decade,
I should say last year. Yeah, new decade. That's cool. Was that lean in when you feel like leaning out? And maybe that's part of that here, is that when you hit that resistance, there's an awesome book called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield that basically talks about this whole concept of just if you hit some resistance, that's where you should be heading. Mental resistance.
Mm. But I think as you said before, the struggle and the mental resistance. There's another book, Daring Greatly, which tackles it from a completely different space. It tackles it from an emotional, empathetic, leaning into your own emotions and being vulnerable space.
I have to read that.
Yeah, and this is Brené Brown, and there's something about the struggle and something about the leaning into, you know, where we don't have ease, because ease is the kind of comfortable, low energy way out, and there's obviously a lot of benefit that comes from the energy, the energy exertion, and you just got to move past the kind of the lizard in the mind that wants to rest and conserve energy. The really motivational one for me out of the book was it talks about right at the end was comparing yourself to yesterday, not to younger people who are like you or who you see. So less of a comparative approach.
Compare yourself to yourself.
Yesterday.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's a really good one.
And you know, people progress at different rates and people are going at it in different ways and different things. So, you know, someone who's stuck at the same or has been enjoying themselves at the same type of company in the same line of work for now, say 10 years, has probably progressed quite far, right, in what they're doing. But maybe that gets to a point where it becomes self-limiting because they might not have seen other things versus someone who might have jumped around 6 times between then, you know, over the last 10 years, or done a few different worldly experiences or taken on a few different things. Might bring a different perspective that they've been pushing that struggle.
And it also depends what that person's been doing day to day. They could have been working at the same place but opening themselves up to a world of learning and information and other experiences, rock climbing or whatever.
That's it.
And your day-to-day activities can play a big role. It is a mindset, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not just about what are you doing for work. It's, you know, what are you doing otherwise, you know? Do I make a decision here to discover something completely different about the world, you know, by reading a book that was written 2,000 years ago, or do I just watch something on the TV for a couple of hours? You know, and there's always those decisions. So I think that's that real compare yourself to yesterday. You know, have I made just a little bit of progress? I think that's important.
I love that.
It compounds.
Be better than you. Yeah, that is for sure it compounds.
And start planning experiments too. That was the other one.
Oh, what's that mean?
So not just necessarily just going out there and you know, trying these different things. Sometimes put a little bit more rigor behind them. So, you know, for example, if you're having a go at writing some blogs, right? As I know you are at the moment, it's kind of like, well, I'm jumping into that, but maybe let's just see how I'm feeling when I'm doing it. Let's see what kind of things attract me in it. Let's see how the performance of that blog goes, and these other little bits and pieces that
seek your feedback loop on yourself, sort of thing.
Yeah, lots of different feedback loops as to how you go,
in a more deliberate
what you get
way
out of it, and as well as the obvious metrics in that type of space. But you know, in other spaces, you might take up rock climbing, as you said, and you might find that you know, you do that every Sunday, but you're actually noting that you're Monday to Friday, you're so much happier, more fulfilled at work, and you may not work out why unless you've kind of set up from the start that, you know, that you might get something out of this, or that you want to see what happens and you're being aware of it.
That's really cool. We'll have to talk about more of that after the episode so I can start doing a bit more of that myself.
And what are you going to take away, Lockie?
So I had a couple of things. So don't worry about planning so much was my note. Tinker and try things and create kinetic energy.
Kinetic energy?
Yeah.
Explain.
So that's just my way of sort of saying move around, be in motion, you know.
Kick up some dust.
Yeah. And feel the feedback, you know, and process over progress was a note I had there too. When follow what you think is going to be the right learning path, the results will come when they come.
Yeah. And so to distinguish that from what we were talking about before, it's not about memorizing the process for solving a maths problem. I think you're talking something a little bit bigger than that.
Yeah, it's more do the things that are going to help you long term more often. You know, and don't worry so much about the progress of those in the short term, because you might stop doing them, a bit like what you said about the blog or what have you, you know. But if you're following the right process, and this is something he talks about in Atomic Habits, which is another good book I hope we review one day, is that, you know, that it'll win out over a long enough period. So, and I kind of came up with, from some of my writing I've been doing, 2 types of learning I'm trying to focus on. The first one is what I'm calling artisan learning, which is approach your work like an artisan. So pick 5 or 6 aspects of your work that are core functions. So communication, your technical skill, time management, whatever they be, and then hone those better and better and better, each one of them. Define how you do it, and then work on it a little bit each day, like you said, or once a week you try and improve your process a little bit more. And that will have huge benefits on the current work you're doing. And you can get those ideas from other domains or reflecting on yourself or reading or what have you. And then the second type of learning is wandering learning, like you're wandering through a field. And that's more what we're talking about today, where you're just picking up things along. You're just curious. You're just looking around and you wonder about things. It is, I'm calling it wandering, not wondering, but it's because that to me resonates with me. It's like just carefree through the world, trying to pick up interesting things as you go, like when you're on holidays and you're just observing. And that's whether read what you want to read.
What sparks your curiosity.
Yeah, whatever sparks your curiosity, but just try and make connections along the way. And I'm going to try and really go through a process of formalizing that a bit more now. I've defined my approach to it and keep honing that too.
I don't, there's a word that comes, I think it comes from a background in Buddhism, but I might be caught out on this, but it's certainly something that's employed in meditation. It's almost like wandering with intention. Now, there's not a forced intention there. You're not really trying to, you know, what can I see? What's going on out there? But you kind of set out to go on this wander just to see what's out there. Anything that kind of sparks that curiosity you're bringing in to maybe explore a little bit further.
Yeah.
And then when you've explored a little bit further, you kind of connect the nodes, connect it back into the big network that you're developing. And who knows what comes from it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. And my second one was create mental networks. Narrowness blinds you and exposes you to the big unseen risk. We can't design the answers in complex environments. So what that means is just to keep doing my wandering, learning and connecting ideas as much as I can. And then lastly, which is something that we haven't talked about too much, but I had questioned the rules when making decisions or strategies. Don't think outside the box, but question the box. So this was one where he went through like a business case experiment where someone had set up the parameters and these students had to think of the answers. But the answer would have been much easier if you had asked the professor for more information, which no one did, and he had more information he was willing to give. And so when you're faced with a situation, think outside the domain of the rules that are set up in whatever you're dealing with? What problem are you dealing with? What assumptions have you made, and how can you kind of break those open?
So this is the thing, right? Is there's that saying, it's think outside the box. And I think maybe a better way to frame that is think about the box.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Or think about what the box is.
Yeah.
As almost like, what are your boundary conditions? And
That's
as you
right.
said, what are the assumptions that have led me to go into this?
Question the box.
Yeah. Assumption.
Can we make that into a nice quote we can put up somewhere?
We can.
Yeah, good.
That could be a nice little post, mate.
Yeah, that's it. We'll put that in the quotation marks and I'll quote you. That was fun, man.
That was exciting. This has been great, mate.
Catch you then.
See ya.